For today's history video, I'd like to explore the enigma of our 17th president, Andrew Johnson. He, of course, took office a month into Abraham Lincoln's second term when Lincoln was assassinated, and served, of course, for the 3 years and 11 remaining months of the presidential term. A real enigma not well understood by many historians. Johnson originally was a small-town tailor who became politically active in rural Tennessee and leveraged that into becoming a local official, a governor of Tennessee. When Tennessee joined the Confederacy, Johnson and many of his constituents in eastern Tennessee, around the Knoxville area, sided with the Union. All of those Appalachian whites from West Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, and northern Georgia did likewise. They didn't own slaves. They were opposed to the plantation control of their states by the rich planters in the lowlands, and they didn't see any reason to leave the Union. In Kentucky and West Virginia, Kentucky remained in the Union, and West Virginia broke away from Virginia to form its own free state and join the Union. They became a part of the Union. In eastern Tennessee, there wasn't enough heft to be able to keep Tennessee in the Union, but they still were discontented with the Confederacy, and Andrew Johnson was sort of their political spokesman. When the Union Army captured Tennessee in 1863 and 64, Lincoln appointed Andrew Johnson as the wartime governor of Tennessee, thereby putting in place a pro-slavery, he owned slaves, anti-Confederate, pro-Union elected official. While Johnson and the Appalachian whites sometimes owned slaves, they were not fundamentally a plantation-based society where slaves were fundamental to their economic life. So when Lincoln was looking for a running mate for 1864, he got rid of Hannibal Hamlin of Maine, who was an abolitionist who he'd put on the ticket in order to strengthen his abolitionist credentials, and he put Andrew Johnson in as vice president instead, changing the name of the party from the Republican Party to the Union Party. And the idea was he was running with a Democrat, but a pro-Union Democrat. When Lincoln was assassinated and Johnson took office, he originally said that he would pursue all of Lincoln's policies and aligned himself with the radical Republicans who wanted to punish the South. And he originally took a point of view considerably to the right of Lincoln's point of view, and really was a hardliner in terms of Reconstruction. But then two things began to eat at him. First of all, he was a racist. He hated black people. He thought they were inferior. He refused to have anything to do with them. He snubbed Frederick Douglass, the free black person of great stature in the White House. And he also was sympathetic with the Southerners because he, in fact, himself was one. And the Southerners began to charm Johnson. They began to go to meetings with him, to praise him, to honor him, and the flattery turned the head of a man who was not used to flattery and who was a fairly humble guy in his origins. And Johnson, who may also have had a drinking problem, he was drunk during his inauguration as vice president in 1864, had a stubborn streak to him, an alcoholic rage part to him, that increasingly focused on opposing the radical Republicans who were trying to enforce a tough agenda on the South. And Johnson moved way over to coddle the former rebels and to have a very soft Reconstruction policy, basically one that would let them back into the Union without any change at all. The Republicans took Reconstruction away from Johnson and vested the power in a Reconstruction Joint Committee in the Congress so that they could kind of run things. Eventually, this boiled down to the question of who would control the military, because the military was enforcing Reconstruction in the South, and Grant was still the commander-in-chief. It boiled down to who would control the military. Grant obviously was the power that controlled it, but Johnson wanted to take control of it. So to do that, he needed to kick out Edward Stanton, who was the war secretary who had served under Lincoln. So Johnson fired Stanton and tried to put some people in his place. Congress objected because they wanted to make sure that the radical Republicans could control the military through the Defense Department. And they invoked the Tenure of Office Act, which they passed, which said that a president could not remove a cabinet official without the consent of the Senate, just as he could not appoint a cabinet official without the consent of the Senate that was already in the Constitution. Johnson vetoed the law, they overrode his veto, and then he refused to enforce it and tried to remove Stanton from office forcibly. The House then impeached him for that. The Senate conducted a trial and he was acquitted by one vote, and he served on for the rest of his tenure, fatally wounded, very little power, left office, and Grant took over in 1868. And Grant, of course, brought in a very strong Reconstruction policy favoring civil rights and making the South really adopt the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. Johnson retired and ran for Senate from Tennessee and served in the Senate for several years until his death. Very interesting figure as president. Thanks for watching.